Okay, so if we go back to our constructive alignment can help us ensure that our assessments are actually meeting our learning needs, okay? So can we all remember, gosh, I'm making you do a lot of remembering today. What's in the first box? For constructive alignment. What's the first thing that we need to think about? Yeah, threshold concepts are our intended learning outcomes, yeah. So what is it that we want our students to learn? What sort of concepts or whatever, or skills that we want them to learn? What's the next, number 2?
Research skills.
Yeah, it's more that whole environment, isn't it? Okay. Yeah, so what are we actually doing in the teaching and learning environment? So whether it's research skills, whether it's problem-solving skills, all of those things we did yesterday, that actually helps students achieve the learning outcomes. So we've decided what we want our students to learn, we've created a learning environment that helps them develop them, and then the final piece of the puzzle then is that we have to assess whether they've done it or not. Yeah? And if you start thinking about using this kind of approach, your assessment immediately is easier to identify what type of assessment is going to be useful for driving forward that learning that you want students to achieve. Okay, so this was the task that you started at the beginning of the week, where you wrote down your learning outcomes, and then you started thinking about a teaching approach that students that you could use to encourage students to develop that learning outcome. And then this is a bit I want you to think about now. Can you envisage how that would be measured? How would you assess that learning? So I brought back your sheets from Monday, which are probably all a bit raggedy now, and your post-its are probably all slipped off. But so you can either just focus on some of those learning outcomes, but I think it'd just be useful in your groups now to look at that chart and think about how you would assess those skills, just as a starting point. Okay. So I don't know whether you want to try to revisit what you had on here, or whether you want to start again, or whether you can even find whose is whose. But that was a blank one. Does anybody recognise this one?
Yes.
So now you need to start thinking about the assessment. Does anybody recognise this one? No. There's some blank ones if yours is not there.
It's ours.
Okay, so just what I need you to do now then is look at the learning outcomes you identified on Monday, look at the teaching environment that you're using to promote those, and then think about what assessment tasks you could use to promote that learning. And you can decide whether that should be formative or summative, okay? And if anybody wants any, do those. If you're starting from blank checks, we'll come up with one learning outcome and then Half of them, some of them, none of them. So just a very quick feel of how you're getting on with that. You guys here?
Actually, as we are,
Please.
as our department is accredited, one of the prerequisites for that is all learning outcomes must be assessed with some kind of an evaluation method. But for example, for my course, I realized that my learning outcomes weren't that good.
Right.
So
it's an iterative process. Now you need to change the learning outcomes and then
change the assessments according to those new learning outcomes.
Lovely. That's perfect. Great. Thank you. You guys? No. Good. So that's a nice bit of honesty. Okay. You guys say clear?
The learning outcomes are mostly met, but there's just one exception. One of our learning outcomes was internalize. This was a threshold writing assignment,
Yeah.
of course. One of our learning outcomes was internalizing the stages of writing process, like brainstorming, drafting, editing, and publishing.
Okay.
So this is a timed, computer-based writing exam.
Oh, okay.
So we cannot measure
Internalization.
and the stages of writing.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Yeah. Yeah. So it's quite useful in saying, well, actually, we're using the wrong assessment tool then for that. Okay. Lovely. And you guys here? Just a feeling for how well you're doing the constructive alignment of assessment with outcomes.
Actually, here in the group project, we're trying to do the most ideal one.
Oh, okay.
Yes, but I have realized that my exams are very old-fashioned and summative, but this just takes me to another even deeper problem. There is something national, or there is a weakness in our national mentality.
Yes.
That's the tradition.
And I think that comes back to that slide we had earlier that said, you know, that's one of the big challenges is that academia is seen as these end of term exams and all the rest of it. And actually, you know, we have to have a bigger conversation in this room. Okay, folks.
Sorry.
Yeah. Go on.
One question. We have also realized that we do not quite understand what we mean by formative assessment.
Okay. Right.
What are the alternatives of the summative exam type? So, for example, instead of essay or quizzes,
Right. That's what we're going to be doing after the break. We'll have some coffee first.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, so a few people have been asking, folks, just before you go, a few people have been asking about what we actually mean by formative assessment. So we're going to spend a bit of time exploring that after the coffee. Okay, okay, I'm ready to start. Grab your seats, please. So I just want to go through, because of the questions at the end, what we understand by formative assessment. The main difference is that the formative assessment doesn't contribute a mark to the final grade, okay? But that doesn't mean say you don't have to mark it, or you don't give a mark back. You might want to just give an indication that this is sitting at a first class or a second class or what have you. It's a sort of assessment that is really developing learning, okay? And there's actually quite a few people who say that we shouldn't actually call it formative assessment. It's just actually part of the learning environment, you know, so you can decide whether you want to distinguish it from that. Formative assessment is critical to the development of learning, and it should be integrated into the curriculum. So you need to think about opportunities for formative assessment all the way through the course that you're teaching. And it's really just opportunities for students to demonstrate or practice certain skills, or to test their own understanding of a concept, maybe to practice solving problems in your discipline. So these will depend on what discipline you're teaching. But if you can imagine a laboratory-based subject, perhaps students do a practical experiment each week, and maybe only one or two of those go forward to make up their final mark. But they do one every week, and each week you might give them feedback, and they might write their lab report, and then they choose one or two that they would then submit for their final summative assessment. But they've received feedback on the other ones. Or, just again thinking about a lab report, there's different parts of that. There's the methodology, there's the results, there's the conclusions. You might ask them to submit a different piece each week. Okay, today I want to see your methodology, and you would give them feedback on that. A couple of weeks later, I just want to see the results section, and you give them feedback on that. So similarly, if they have to do a presentation at the end of the course as part of their summative assessment, what opportunities do they get to do a presentation where it doesn't contribute to the mark, so they can just practice and get a little bit of feedback? And those type of things, you know, you might get feedback from the group. It doesn't always have to be the teacher that's giving the feedback. It's just giving them an opportunity to self-assess and to think about what it is they're trying to do. So lots of different ways depending on the discipline. Other sort of simple ways that you can put formative feedback into your program is maybe developing some online quizzes that the students can do just to test their understanding. And we can do it like we've done here with things like Kahoot in the classroom, or you can put them online for the students. There's many tools now that allow you to just offer those short quizzes. One that's really good is called Peerwise, because within that the students can actually write their own questions as well. So there's opportunity for students to write their own multiple choice questions, and it's one of those things that you can gamify, so they kind of get points for how many questions they put in, and if other students think that their question's a really good question, their rating goes up, you know, in one of those kind of social gaming kind of ways. So that can be quite a useful way to engage students. And the key thing about formative assessment is that it doesn't contribute to the final award, but that doesn't mean to say that you don't have to mark it. You might give students some sort of broad feedback, say, well, you're currently sitting around a B or a 2-1. You know, these are the sort of things you might want to do to bring up to a first, or you're just sitting a borderline fail. These are the things you might want to do to pass. You know, so it's that formative feedback and an approximation of where they're sitting. You know, so that they understand what areas they need to work on. This afternoon we'll look at rubrics and marking criteria in a bit more detail, so you can they can be very useful at pointing out to students where they need to go. Okay, so that is that part. Just to reiterate that, I'm sorry if I went through that too quickly this morning. What I want you to do this next session is to focus on one or two of those learning outcomes that you've identified this morning that perhaps you're not assessing very well. I just need to flick through back to where we were.